Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm your host, Adam Piercy, with my co-host, Mick Mulroy. Today we wanted to talk about something that's, I think, near and dear to our hearts and why we started this podcast, which is the future of Stoicism. It's always easy in these podcasts to talk about the past, which is great, to talk about what's happening right now. But ultimately, you have to have a goal. You have to have a direction that you're moving. I usually like when I talk to mentees in my mentorships, I do like to use the word trajectory. And Mick and I wanted to talk about this today to get out there how we feel and also give others in the community a chance to chime in, hopefully, as well. So, Mick, what are your first thoughts on the future of Stoicism? Where it is, where it's going, where you'd like it to go?
Well, to start with, and I like the way you introed this, it's one thing just to talk about people that lived a long time ago and the concepts that they developed, which have carried throughout Western civilization and beyond for thousands of years, which is awesome. And it's one of the reasons why I was so fascinated in this, even as a kid, and remain so.
Yeah, we're history nerds.
Because it's history nerds, right? And we all come from somewhere. If you don't appreciate history, generally you don't know where you're going. That's in general, not just Stoicism. So that's, I think, super important. And we won't give up on the concept of continuously drawing on the history of the philosophy we follow. But I don't think we should view it as frozen in time. I don't think we should ever view it as dogma in the sense that this is what's written, don't add to it. You can't do it better. And there's no like evolution. It's not a living document kind of thing. I think everything's the opposite. I think you know your past, learn your past. You figure out how it can help currently, which we try to do. That's why this is applied Stoicism. But then what's the next phase? Right. So I obviously I'm not the one that's going to decide that, but I hope to contribute. We contribute to that. But people who adhere to Stoicism should all, I hope, want to contribute. It's not just reading Seneca and Epictetus, and obviously really is. It's not just being able to quote their quotes.
Yeah. I think one big thing for us for sure is I don't get the sense that either of us ever really thought about like we'd like to see Roman values return, right? Interest, and I know that sort of feels like a joke, but ultimately I think the historical texts are super important because that's the basis for everything else. But I think we've had some jokes back and forth about how there's that meme going around about how white men think about Rome way too much, right?
Like every day.
Yeah, like every day. Honestly, I do, but it's because I'm doing research for a later episode coming up about about constitutions. But so I think that's real. But at the same time, I think you and I've always gotten the sense that you and I sort of think about it in a modern sense. So my first thing that I would say I would hope would happen with this is I would hope that people do embrace some of the more modern writers even more than we already have. So, friends of the podcast include Massimo Pigliucci and Donald Robertson and Chris Gill and other members of a movement that originally was started in the UK called Modern Stoicism, right? And it's interesting, I would like to see people take the classical texts, but as well as take modern version of the modern writers and use those, as they go forward, because I think it's important to look at these things with a modern lens. Like it's easy to talk about how in Epictetus' world, right, slavery was normal, and it was very different than it was in, say, antebellum South United States, for example. But at the same time, the word still says slave. It still has to be interpreted. And so I think, using those modern writers as a lens to show, how it looks today, I think is very important. So, but yeah, I really don't ever get the sense that we want Rome to return. It's more just like we want values that have had, a long-standing tradition of doing good things. We'd like to see probably resonate more. So,
Yeah,
but
totally. And so the thought, we were talking about this before the podcast episode, what I would promote,
yeah,
in addition to one thing to quickly address, sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, these people are just trying to make money on Stoicism." Okay, well, everybody has to earn a living, but I think everybody just mentioned, Donald,
yeah,
the whole group that we are tied with, modern Stoic movement, Chris Gill. Also, I would add the Aurelius Foundation
yep,
is also a really big deal for me, and I'm part of it. Justin, great guy. Brian Holiday, been on his podcast. I think he is really pushing um, the new generation of Stoics. I think it's all
yeah,
great. The fact that they sell their book and make a living. I mean, it's like, yeah, so what? That's good.
yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't even address it, but they do
Oh,
sell. You do hear that every once in a while. But my
yeah.
my if it makes you feel better, me and Adam make no money off of this podcast.
No,
Not
it's
intentionally. Not intentionally.
I think it's the other way around.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
but we would if we could. So
sure.
that's my point. But as far as the future,
Hmm.
I think if you look at the foundational document, if you look at Zeno's Republic, which was obviously an answer to Plato's Republic, it set
Yeah,
up the idea of an ideal society. And yes, even today, it would be really advanced, and in some senses, Pollyannish, in the sense that, like, it's probably never going to get there. But maybe that was his point, is to try to inspire us to be to a place that is just so advanced that it's some
yeah,
kind of sci-fi novel. Even today, maybe not today, but certainly back then. But what I do think it promoted was the idea of a universal movement based
hmm,
on the virtue principles.
yeah,
I think you could have a political movement, and it would be completely in line with that concept, the idea of the universal citizen.
yeah,
Now, also, like we were talking about before, I don't think, and I love to hear people uh, with alternative views or the similar views. I don't think it could be a political party, and the reason why is political parties almost immediately have to take positions on each
yeah,
issue, right?
yeah.
You're on the left, I'm on the right. We could easily both be in a political Stoic movement,
We could,
because
yeah,
the idea that I think is you bring people who share the same principles, who consider themselves adherents to this philosophy or Stoics,
hmm,
but one could go in the political system in the U.S. One could be a Republican, an Independent, or a Democrat,
right,
right? And the same with your political system. But you could still be in the same political movement that promotes the idea of wisdom and justice and
right,
courage and self-reliant discipline or
yeah,
temperance.
yeah,
They can promote the search for knowledge through science and everything that goes with that. It
right,
advances humanity. It believes in equality, which isn't a left, right, or center thing. Everything that was originated in this, which is why we follow it, originated with Zeno's Republic, um, could be the basis for a political movement. And then from that movement, if you decide to either join a party or run for office, then you could be in both. You could be in the
yeah,
Stoic political movement and in the Conservative Party or Liberal Party in Canada. You could be either,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
you're right.
No, and I totally get that, and I think that's a really good way to look at it, right? Like you and I have had this conversation about Stoicism, not as a political movement for a long time, and I think what I would say is more like Stoicism as a belief system, which is a key belief system for me and for you as well, is the movement, and then the political party is essentially the interpretation of that, right? So if all Stoics right, believe in hierarchies, concentric circles, which talks about your how much you control or don't control, right? So there's yourself, and the next circle out is like your immediate family, and your next circle out is like your immediate friends, and your next circle out is your neighbors, and da da da. And you go from there. Like if all Stoics in the world believe that, right, then they would believe that we should take the chance to take care of those that fall within our circles to some degree, right? So the difference I would see with that would be the interpretation of that. So like a someone on the left, I'll say left on the spectrum, someone on the left might be looking at greater social programs, right? Socialized medicine, socialized healthcare, because then you can care for yourself and your family and your neighbors and your neighbors that aren't even your neighbors because they're in another province or state in your country. While someone on the right might say, well, we want to help people more by, if you're a conservative, lowercase c conservative, right? They might say, I'm a small government person, but I want to have, a strong private sector that gives people good jobs and good insurance and good this.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're both different essential, they're essentially both different ways of interpreting that idea of caring for those within your concentric circles, right? They're just different, but they come from a same base value. I hope I've interpreted that right, but that's how I kind of see this, right? It's not a
Mm-hmm.
political movement, it's a belief system, right? And then you go from there in the same way that, people who believe, I can't think of anything good off the top of my head, but like, there's a lot of people who believe the same thing and it comes down to their interpretation of it. And I think that's probably what how I see that is going forward. If we, as long as we reach a key common ground, right, it just becomes the differences of degree with how to deal with that.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm calling it a political movement, because the intent for me would be to influence politics.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you can't be left, right, or center, as I just said, but the influence is the
Yeah.
principles of Stoicism.
Right.
So I think, I mean, especially Stoics would say, what if we looked at whatever legislature we had in our country and said, I can see Stoicism throughout this,
Right.
and that party, and the no people part, the no party people. I think we'd be better off. You see
Right.
what I mean? So
Yeah.
the idea behind it would be, we're not going to have like a platform and say what we think about abortion, for example, or taxes high, low, or medium, or um,
Yeah.
it. That's what the political parties do. A political
Right.
movement for Stoicism would say, we're going to field candidates that have those principles
Right.
without telling them, because who are we to tell anybody, but what they think about any individual issue. That's up to you. Uh, and then you go and you run for office and you win or
Yeah.
lose as whatever you are, but you're also
Yeah.
part of the political movement of Stoicism. And it could be
Yeah.
universal. It's also not tied to a specific country. It'll probably be mostly confined to democracies, because I don't see this really working in an autocracy, but I don't
Right.
think they'd be too keen on that. But certainly it could also promote democracies. That would be one of the other big things it could do.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not like we had a seminar and came up with all the details of this,
Yeah.
or whether we completely agree with it. But that's what I'm throwing down. That the future of the Stoic movement should look for impact and influence. It's not just a bunch of
Yeah.
people who like to think about Rome too much, right?
Right. Yeah. For sure.
I fall into that category.
Yeah.
It's we want to in the next generation. So I think for the folks that are already reached the age of majority, this would be a good thing. For those that aren't, the Stoic movement can also have a big impact on education for the next
Yeah.
generation. Right? It could be a twofer.
Yeah.
It's basically to promote the ideals and the concepts that Stoicism has always engendered through
Yeah.
public service, public office, and education.
Yeah. Yeah. And applying what Stoics view as social responsibility, right, or duty, with those persons. And you're not picking candidates because they wear a certain color. You're picking a candidate because they embody a value that is important to you. So
Exactly.
pivoting a bit, right, from the political sphere, I do think Stoicism, excuse me, I do think Stoicism has a social aspect to it that I would really like to see come back to the fore. which is like, and we were talking about this on an earlier podcast we were recording about how like socializing is seemingly decreasing now. You sort of stay at home in the box and whatnot. And, this is one of those ones where I'd actually would like to see it be, much more like how it originally started, where like there aren't stoas everywhere, right? I mean, it's a covered porch though, so they kind of are everywhere. But ultimately, I would like to see, you know, us return to this sort of more social aspect of discussion. That is something I would love to see this movement start to promote again, right? Where, from the political discussion we were just having, right? Where under the same porch roof we have left wingers, right wingers, centrists, right? All across the spectrum there to discuss these values and their interpretations of it. Because then we get better because our views are challenged. We're learning, which is the
Absolutely.
wisdom's side, but also we have courage to stand up against oppressive or inappropriate or incorrect information presented in those worlds. And there were times where it did kind of come back, like in the time of like the Enlightenment, right? There was the salon, right? You'd have
Mhm.
and the salons like that, right? I'm sure the names you think of are like Diderot or Rousseau or
Mhm.
I'm trying to think of somebody else, but let's go with those two. Ultimately, though, I think that's what I would like to see come out of this. You and I have joked. I think you've joked about this with me. I don't know if I ever said this out loud, but like this is kind of therapy, right? Like we get to
Mhm.
this is our stoic. This is part of our stoic practice, and I would love to see that kind of be the case, right? Like maybe it becomes a regular stoic group that meets once a week. Maybe it's becoming more just being open to having these salons, but I would like to see that take shape again and make sure that these salons are open door, big umbrellas for everybody, right? Men, women, members of all across the community, right? LGBTQ, everything. And it should be a safe place for all to voice their opinions, have their conversations, and exchange free ideas. And so
This is
that's
all
that's what I
coming
would first
together
throw out
right
there.
here on this podcast. I super dig that idea, the Stoa. And what is a modern day common man's version of a salon?
Uh, you're gonna you're gonna say it's a pub, yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm with you. I'm totally with you. Yeah.
We don't even have to create anything. We can just go meet
No.
at a pub or whatever you prefer to call it, and that's
Yeah.
and start this movement. Why
Yeah.
not? And I like the other part of what you said a lot because this doesn't happen anymore, and it used to. I was just reading an article on uh, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, which you might not know as a Canadian, but obviously Ronald Reagan was the president. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. Reagan was
Yeah.
a
Right. Okay.
Republican. Tip O'Neill was a Democrat. They used to go get a pub or a pint at the pub, literally,
Yeah.
uh, like every weekend together.
Right.
Now, yes, they had common ethnic heritage, Irish, of course, but everybody talks
Always the
about that.
Irish.
It is. But I'm not trying to make this an Irish thing.
No,
But
I get it.
I mean, people always talk about that relationship as it was almost like just unbelievable, and I
Yeah.
don't think it was. I think at one time, yeah, you're Republican. I'm just using the U.S., but you're conservative. I'm a liberal, whatever. Um, we could still hang out and have beer, and it's not like now. But that's not the case anymore. It's almost like you're the enemy, right?
Yeah.
So if the other thing this could do is break down those barriers a bit. Like you have commonality. So in their Tip
Yeah.
and Ronnie's commonality was their ethnic heritage, which is very strong, in case you haven't noticed, in that group of Americans.
Yeah.
But you could also have the same kind of thing with people who are both Stoics, but don't share the same political beliefs. They could
Yeah.
still understand they have a commonality and then have a civil conversation and appreciate the other person's side, even if they don't agree with it. But that's not
Right.
where politics is going nowadays.
No,
It
it's
is
so
toxic.
polarized now.
It's so polarized. They won't listen to each other. There's no discussion. It turns into a shouting match almost immediately. So,
Yeah.
so in addition to bringing the characteristics of Stoicism into um, public life, it can also help people understand the other's perspective and not
Yeah.
just treat it like a sports event where the other team could do no right, your team
Yeah.
could do no wrong, The call's always bad if it was against you. You know, that kind of stuff. There's
Yeah.
no. Actually, you make a good point. Actually, I never thought about it that way because
Yeah.
I'm in a vortex that only talks about it from one perspective.
Yeah.
These pubs could be that ability to do that.
Yeah. And I think, the polarization is very clearly seen where I will say, like on the calendar of events recently, the State of the Union happened in the United States, right? And, when certain things are said, some people clap and the other ones specifically don't, even if it's something that I think would have been originally kind of universal.
Yeah,
And that to me kind of shows that we're already kind of losing this battle, right? It's like, well, your tie is a different color than mine, so therefore I don't agree with you, right? And I don't know. I feel like that's something we're losing right now. What I would say though too, right, is like, because a lot of people say, well, these events are happening now. Like Ryan Holiday had a tour back in the fall, right? And
yeah,
I saw him here in Toronto. It was great. And you have other things like that where you get people talking about it. But I think one thing about Stoicism for me as well, just as like an extrapolation of this idea of the more social aspect, is that Stoicism really started as a street philosophy, is sort of how it's been described, right?
yeah. I
Like,
like
so
that.
there's the Zeno and Hierocles and, all of those persons, and they're excellent. But, Zeno himself did not want Stoicism to be uh, a philosophy of what is the word? It's described in Ryan Holiday's Lives of the Stoics. There's a word, a philosophy of celebrity, I guess is how you would call it. Like there
Yeah,
was a
it's like a
time where
cult
it
of
was,
personality. They
yeah,
didn't
cult of
want it. That's why
personality.
they didn't
Yeah, they were
call it
going to call it
Zenoism.
Zenoism,
Yeah,
Zenoans, right? And then specifically, they didn't do that. So what I would like to see is I would like to see sort of more of a responsibility taken on by the general populace, right? So, you and I have day jobs. We don't do this for a living. I work in the space program and you work in, I can't
national
remember,
security,
national
national
security,
security,
right?
and humanitarian. I
And
try to think of
humanitarian, right?
things.
And you do some journalism work with that. So, but we're not specifically philosophers, is what I'm saying. And, I would love to see this kind of, build out to a much bigger thing because the one thing for sure, right, is like everyone's going to go, well, we have meetups all the time. Like I was at a barbecue with my neighbors last weekend, but like my whole thing is, did you talk about the weather and cars? That's great. But I struggle when I'm at social events because people want to talk about things. And then it's like, we're talking about cars and weather and, the latest thing show on streaming media, right? Which is great. But at the same time, like I think there's one thing that Stoics have the ability to do a lot of time. It's do the tough talk and do is just as you said, say, hey, I don't think I agree with that, or say, oh, that's a really interesting way to put that. And that's what I would like to see happen more on the streets as a street philosophy, right? Where you can have the
Yeah,
disagreement and it goes okay, and someone can change their mind, right? I think
yeah,
Marcus even
that's
has
true
quotes about
wisdom.
that. Yeah,
That's true wisdom is ability to change your mind.
ability to change your mind, ability to change your mind.
But yeah, to your point, I mean, somebody could say, "Well, I talked about stoicism at the barbecue," but the idea, at least the way I'm envisioning it, would be
Yeah,
that you have an event at wherever pub or diner or whatever um, about this. It's not just one of the
yeah,
topics, right? Obviously can't get people to do what they don't want to do, but
yeah,
that's where I think the future of stoicism should be. It should take the past with
yeah,
it, but it should look at the future for how it can influence it. And
yeah,
I think that is through education, that is through service, which doesn't have to be in a public office, and public office, because ultimately that's what affects everybody. So when you
yeah,
pass a law, it affects society. So that's why I'm
yeah,
focused on that. You could either do it as a group that promotes people into office that
yes,
share the characteristics. I would say that actually are adherents to it, not
yeah,
just find people who are like courageous, um, and then promote them and promote
yeah,
them collectively
yeah,
because that's how people get to get into public offices. Other
yeah,
people support them. Now, I just
for
saw
sure.
you brought up Ryan. I just saw last night my old boss, Secretary Mattis, General Mattis, with Ryan Holiday on PBS.
PBS, yeah,
Margaret Hoover, yeah,
firing line, right?
he's
Firing
back.
line.
which is great. But like he's an example of a modern Stoic, right?
Right.
That most people know, right? And I had the privilege to work for,
Yeah.
and he exemplifies it, I think, perfectly. Now he probably won't want to run for office, which is why we want him to run for office. Right?
Yeah.
It's like George Washington scenario. Um,
Or Cincinnatus. Yes.
so there's going to be that a bit of that, you know. So
Yeah.
the people that you most want to run for office are going to be the most hesitant, probably.
Yeah.
But if you promote, if they start looking at it as service and not some kind of self-aggrandizement, which many people that go into politics
Yeah.
look at it, it's like I'm going to go promote myself, and then I'm going to go, I don't know, make money of it somehow. But if you find the right people in the Stoic movement that you think would do it for selfless service, like I think, and I'm not,
Yeah.
he might call me and say, stop promoting me for running for office. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that he would be the person, an example of a person that I think would be
Right.
perfect to run for office because of his history of self sacrifice, service, and his humility. Um,
Yeah.
but I
For
think that's
sure.
another thing it could do.
Yeah.
It could find those individuals and let them know that there's a whole group behind them that or her. Let's
Hmm.
actively seek, uh,
Yeah.
to have females in this mix to run for office because we
Yeah.
believe that they would be the best representation of the Stoic political movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I think it's really important, though, that we also pivot a little bit here to talk about what's going on right now and how we want it to grow. Because, you know, Mick and I both have worked, we've both worked Stoicons before or other Stoic conferences online, right? Like, and I should highlight Brittany Polat and Phil Yanov, who have been, working Stoic conferences online. I mean, Stoicon is a very common world event that people are aware of and work. I mean, Donald Robertson and Ryan Holiday and everybody like that has spoken at those events.
Yeah,
And I don't think you and I are discounting those events at all. In fact, we want those events to go on more. I guess it's more just like, for me, the social aspect of this, I would like to see, in addition to that once a year event, I'd love to see it be something that's like weekly or at least more regular so that
yeah,
it becomes a
I would.
common part of our parlance, right? Like, because Stoic Week is excellent. We always want to promote the Stoic Week activity because it's just a great thing that we can do. But at the same time, um, when you're really into a philosophy like this, you start to realize that it's a 52-week practice. You know what I mean? Like, you're doing it all year round, every day. It helps shape the decisions we make and the directions we go. And that's all I would wanted to make sure that we threw out there. Stoicon events are great. In fact, I co-hosted a Stoic Care event with Brittany Polat a few years ago, where we talked
Yeah,
about how Stoicism as a caring philosophy, it is a huge part of that. That was really great. And so all I'm saying is I think we should have those events, and in addition, right, it should be common parlance to be able to talk about these things with
totally,
each other.
totally. Maybe we could ask them if we could do a section on global Stoic movement. I mean, I think
Mm,
it's hand in glove, right? It's hand in glove.
sure.
Um, the more Stoic events and groups, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think for sure this is something that we also want to hear from the community. Like, as much as their leaders, Donald, Ryan, Massimo, you, right, for example, who are commonly seen as leaders in this, and you do need leaders to help kind of move things along. I think there's the average Joe, average Jane Stoic, right, that I would love to see. Um, really start to come to the fore here and kind of move this along in a different way and take the responsibility that I think we all have to take. And sort of that's my view on it, though. We would love to hear from the group, from the excuse me. We'd love to hear from our fans if we have any. We'd love to hear from the populace who listens, right? Like, info@pubandporch.com. Leave a comment on the video, or any kind of way. You can find us on Twitter and things like that, or excuse me, um, X. Sorry, I keep doing that. But I think the one thing is that Mick and I are, and I'd love to hear your take on this, Mick. But when I think about Mick and I's role, I think of us as one voice that might be just in front of the others. But I would like to see us be one voice among many, many voices that grow as a movement, as a, eventually it'll reach a crescendo, to use a music term, of like sort of coming together in one loud, um, display of communication about how we feel about our values, right? I don't know if
Yes,
that made sense, but
it
what do you
does make
think, though?
sense. That's what I would like to do. That's what I would literally like to be one part of, hopefully many, that get this going. And 5 generations from now, it is part of society
Yeah,
universally. That's what I would
yeah,
like to see. And maybe it's a super lofty goal. Okay, we're not going to do it by ourselves. So
yeah,
hopefully we get a lot of people to buy into this and
yeah,
promote it, and obviously eventually take the torch and run with it.
yeah. Yeah, and I say, like, it's interesting, right? Because I had something happen at work this week where I was swinging for the fences on something, and I'm probably only going to get at best 60 or 70% of what I was asking for this event I was trying to put together. But at some point, you just kind of go, well, you got to aim for the moon, right? At least you'll land among the
Mhm.
stars. Like, you got to you have to have the lofty goal to kind of get there, because
Yeah,
it's we don't always get what we want, but sometimes you get what you need, and in some ways I feel like this is the case. There's so many things pulling on people. We just wrapped recording on an episode talking about toxic masculinity and what's it's doing to young men, or even in all men, for example. Hearing this, I'll say, junk that kind of gets thrown around out there. So if we want this to grow, if you want it to be informing what's going to happen in the populace, then it's got to start somewhere. You got to have a direction you're going.
yeah.
So,
Let's get
so
it going.
yeah,
And
we got to get it going.
you
So,
know, when's the best day to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best day? Today.
yeah,
Right. So let's do it today.
yeah, absolutely. You can only handle what's now. The past is over. The future hasn't happened. The only time you can take action is now. And I think we're seeing that. Well, though, I think that's a good time for us to wrap up. I'll just reiterate what I literally was just saying, though. We'd love to hear from the community on this. Leave a comment on the video on YouTube, or send us an email at info@pubandporch.com. We've had a couple people start to write in now, which is great. Love to hear from you
Yes.
more. Tweet, not tweet us, whatever it is now called, X us on X, whatever it's called. I'm sorry, I don't remember what it's called. Or reach out to us as you can. We really would love to start, keep the conversation rolling on something like this, and see where we can get it to go. As much as we don't want it to be like Rome, it'd be interesting if there was an open. Actually, I will say, I forgot to say this earlier. There is a new agora, essentially, that's been built here in the city I live in,
Oh,
which actually technically also has a stoa to it. So who knows? Maybe we'll be out on the lakeshore under
there you
under
go.
under under a roof having a conversation one day. No togas though. I hate togas. They're really hard to wear. Any closing thoughts from you, Mick?
Go find a pub, start the movement, get going,
Yeah,
and tell us about it, and we will promote it. If there is a, if you want to do this, that would be fantastic. It could
yeah,
be in a team house, it could be in a pub, it could be in a diner, it could be in a coffee
yeah.
house, could be in a tea house, right? I'm trying to hit everybody's ethnic group there.
It's all
Um,
good.
yeah, that's what we want to see. And if it works, it works. And it's going to be really beyond our control, but we can promote it every episode.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast this week. Cheers, Mick.
Slasha. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Today's music was provided by bensound.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.